us have remembered to bring our laptops with us if you have one, and that will be useful tomorrow. Then to focus on the work, particularly of deaneries, looking forward to hearing Andy Broom, who's going to tell us something of the work in the York Diocese, of how that's been going. And no doubt he'll have some excellent insights into what went well and maybe what didn't. And we look forward to hearing Nick Shepherd, who's very much involved in the agenda of setting God's people free, to stimulate our thinking and our understanding. And Bev Botting will be joining us briefly tomorrow also to take us into the world of statistics, but not for too long, I hasten to add. And to root all that we're going to do over the next few days in the world of prayer, we are delighted to welcome Bishop Allison White, who will be with us, or she's with us tonight. And Alison, lovely to have you here. And it will be a real treat for us tomorrow morning to be with her. And of course, a very, very warm welcome to Mark Tanner, who's here somewhere, in the back there, Bishop Mark, to whom I want to say a huge thank you. Mark has stood in at the last moment, as it were. Bishop Martin Seeley, as some of them you will have seen our early leaflets, he was going to be our conference bishop. Unfortunately, the Archbishop of Canterbury decided he needed to send him to Hong Kong. So strong words will be had with the Archbishop when we next get hold of him. But Bishop Mark, we are very, very grateful. He's the Suffragan Bishop of Berwick and kindly agreed to be with us this weekend. And perhaps we should say a note of thanks to Bishop Christine, who had to rearrange the episcopal diaries of both of them to free him up to be with us. So we are grateful to her and very much to you. Mark will be with us to listen, to challenge us in our thinking, paint the picture that he sees as we go through these next few days. And so probably it's time for me to be quiet. You don't want to hear any more from me. But that very warm welcome, and to a very special welcome to Bishop Adrian, who is going to begin our conference for us this evening, considering how deaneries and social justice work. And Bishop Adrian, we're really pleased that you've come to be with us tonight. So I'll be quiet and say a very warm welcome to you, and please do a round of applause to welcome you.
Thank you. Can you hear me? I think I'm working off this microphone here. It's good. One off. Whoa, those are still on. Did you need those off and this on? Great, we're there. I think we're there now. It's really good to be with you this evening. Thank you for inviting me. Can I get just the personal bit out of the way in a minute or two at the beginning? So some of you will know that this is a sort of swan song for me. I'm about to step down from being Bishop of Stepney over the course of the next few weeks because of health issues. So I've suffered from debilitating migraines for a long time. I thought I'd cured them last year, about 18 months ago, with a new drug treatment, and suddenly discovered 6 months after starting this drug treatment that I was suffering quite severe mental health issues around anxiety and depression. And it took me, because I'm not very bright, took me a long time to realize that the two things might be connected. And sure enough, the drugs I was taking had the side effect of causing some of the mental health issues. I'm now off the drugs, back with the migraines, every 8 days, 48-hour migraine, and although I could work through those in the past, now I find that when I'm in the midst of a migraine, the fragility of the mental ill health that I had comes back in those 48 hours. So I am struggling to actually work properly, cope properly with life in the midst of those migraines. So when I am well, and I'm probably as well as I've been for some time. And I have to say, I'm glad I'm well this evening to be with you. But when I'm not, I'm not. And so took the very difficult decision, took me a long time to reach it, difficult decision that I had to give myself a chance to recover my health. So I've taken the decision to step out of ministry for 6, 9, 12 months, however long it takes, and to trust myself to God's provision and what and where that will take me. So just to get that out of the way at the beginning, but I am fully present and with you this evening, even though my farewell is in 2 weeks tonight, and I can't quite believe it's as close as that. So it's good to be with you. This has gone off. Oh no, it's back again. Hold on. Let me just get this up. Right. about nearly there. Good, right, we're there. So, I was an area dean for a while when I was in Birmingham, and so I have some experience of thinking strategically about what a deanery is and how you can make the best use of it. My response to being an area dean in Birmingham was to try and persuade the diocese at the time to make it the smallest deanery in the whole of the Church of England, focused entirely on the city centre of Birmingham, and to completely restructure the deanery so that it became based around the sector. The sector basis of a major city centre rather than on geographic parish areas. And so I have some experience of thinking strategically about deaneries. In London, particularly in Stepney, we're extremely fortunate because the area of London I oversee, which is the 3 London boroughs of Tower Hamlets and Hackney and Islington, are pretty much coterminous with the deaneries. So our deaneries follow a very significantly helpful structure. They relate and align with their context. And I know that for some of you that is not the case. It's very difficult to see the rhyme or the reason for your deanery boundary and who you might relate to. One of the things that I quite offer, nothing to do with social justice, is I do think that deaneries need to think about how they can align themselves with the contextual structure around them that makes sense. So it's something I wanted to do in the middle of Birmingham, and it's something I've been fortunate enough to inherit in a place like Stepney. Let me start with a word of warning tonight. I'm going to get you to do most of the joining up work this evening. So I am going to talk, broadly speaking, about social justice, and probably less about deaneries this evening. And I hope that as we go through, you will try and make the connections yourselves to what does this mean for the deanery that I am in? What are the things which we are currently doing, which we can celebrate and affirm and amplify and accelerate? And what are the things that we're not doing that we could think about doing for the future? There'll be 3 questions at the end. I think I'll ask you to discuss around your tables, how does this relate to your context and your situation? What are the things that you are currently doing, and what are the things that you might think about doing for the future? So have those questions in the back of your mind as I go through this. I want to begin by going back to 1997 and a part of my history. I had been rector of St Martin in the Bullring for a year in 1997. And I'd led a 6-month process of listening and reflecting and learning and praying to try and discern what the church was being called to do at the heart of the Bullring as it got redeveloped back in the late 90s. And the Bullring, which was about to be demolished and completely rebuilt as a brand shiny new shopping centre. What were we being called to do? And we had this long listening exercise, and I took myself away at the end of it to try and distill all that had been said and spoken and discussed and prayed through. And I'd written up a paper for the church under the title Fully Human, Fully Alive. And I was back in the process of meeting up with every single group in the life of St Martin's to run it past them and to get their feedback. And so it was, I found myself sitting in my front room one evening with the St Martin and the Bullring Social Responsibility Committee. And after some fairly polite opening exchanges, one of the group nailed me with this absolutely killer question. This plan, this strategy, is it about saving the church or saving the world? That question needs to haunt every church, every vicar, every congregation, dare I say, every Archbishop's Council, and I gather they're meeting here in another room, perhaps haunt every deanery. Is this about saving the church or about saving the world? It is one of the best and most important questions that anyone can ask of what we are trying to do in the life of our churches. It is so easy to be motivated by a desire to build a bigger, better, stronger church, when as followers of Jesus Christ, individually and collectively, we should be motivated by a desire to save the world. Our vision must be the kingdom of God. So I'd like you to hold that question in your mind and cast it across all that I am going to say, and I will come back to it at the end. I recently asked Justin Welby if he thought that the Anglican Church needed to develop our own version of the 10 principles of social justice which the Roman Catholics have developed over many years. And he said, definitely not. These are more than adequate. So I am going to run through the 10 principles of social justice which have been long developed by the Roman Catholics, because one of my observations about the Church of England is that we have become merely activist when it comes to social justice. We have not thought sufficiently about why we do what we do in terms of social justice. So I'm going to rattle through these 10 principles. The first three, this gets very small, but I've got to get 10 on the screen. So that says human dignity if you're at the back and you can't see it. The foundation of all Catholic social teaching is the belief in the inherent dignity of the human person. Human life is sacred and each person is precious, made in the image of God. The dignity of the human person is the starting point for a moral vision for society. The second principle is community and the common good. In other words, the human person is not only sacred, but is also social. The obligation to love our neighbour requires a broader social commitment to the extent that everybody has a responsibility to contribute to the common good. That's the second principle. The third is something around rights and responsibilities. Human dignity can be protected and healthy communities can be achieved only if human rights are protected and responsibilities are met. So every person has a fundamental right to life and to those things required for human decency: food, shelter, clothing, employment, healthcare, education, the list goes on. But corresponding to those rights are duties and responsibilities to one another, to our families, to society at large. Fourth principle is known by various names. The Catholics tend to talk about the option for the poor. You may have heard the phrase bias to the poor. We are called to examine every individual personal decision, every institutional policy, every bit of our economic affairs in terms of their effect on the poor. The option for the poor, the bias to the poor, is an essential part of society's effort to achieve the common good. And a basic moral test of society is how it treats its most vulnerable members. And you will know that the Anglican Church has adopted this in various forms over the years. Participation is the fifth principle. In other words, all people have a right to participate in the economic, political and cultural life of our society. This is a fundamental demand of justice and a requirement for human dignity. It is wrong for a person or a group to be excluded unfairly or to be unable to participate in society. Principle number 6, the dignity of work. The economy, and I speak as an economist in another life, the economy must serve people, not the other way around. And I won't ask you to decide which way around you think it's working at the moment. All workers have a right to productive work, to decent and fair wages, to safe working conditions, and to organise themselves and to form and join unions. People also have a right to economic initiative and to private property, but these rights all have limits, constraints, boundaries. No one should be allowed to amass excessive wealth when others lack the basic necessities of life. And Catholic teaching will oppose collectivist or statist economic approaches. It will also reject the notion that a free market automatically produces justice. The next principle is the stewardship of creation. Again, this will be very familiar to you from all the work that the Church has been doing on the environment in recent years. So the goods of the earth are gifts from God intended for the benefit of all. We are not the ultimate owners of these goods. We are simply the temporary stewards and trustees. We're entrusted with the responsibility of caring for these gifts and preserving them for future generations. We are not merely consumers and users. Global solidarity, we're moving towards the end of these principles, and then I'll try and earth it a little bit. So we are one human family, whatever our national, racial, ethnic, economic and ideological differences. We are our brothers and sisters' keepers, wherever they live. And solidarity means that loving our neighbour will have local, international dimensions in an interdependent world. This is an interesting one, one you don't often hear talked about in Anglican circles, it seems to me. The constructive role for government. In other words, the government has a positive moral function. We're right in the midst of the party conferences at the moment, aren't we? Government is an instrument to promote human dignity, protect human rights, and build the common good. And in a complex society, we cannot always carry out our responsibilities to others on a one-to-one basis. So a key function of government is to assist us in fulfilling these responsibilities and promoting the common good. And according to the principles of subsidiarity, what needs to be done should always be carried out as close as possible to where the need occurs. And then the final one of these 10, the promotion of peace. Catholic social teaching promotes peace as a positive, action-orientated concept. Peace is the fruit of justice and is dependent upon right order among human beings. And there is a close relationship in Catholic social teaching between peace and justice. I think these principles have stood the test of time over many years, and there's a huge amount written about each of these 10 principles. As I said earlier, I think it is time for the Church of England to address some of the fundamental philosophical, sociological, theological ideas that undergird our engagement with social justice. We have a tendency just to get in and do it. And that's great when it happens, but we need to be thinking about why and how every bit as much as the Roman Catholics have over the years. With that in mind, let me move off in a totally different direction. I do want to say a word or two this evening about cities. And I say this with some apology to those of you who don't come from cities. And I'm aware that there will be a number of you sitting around this room tonight who are from suburban or rural communities. Please bear with me just for a moment or two. Cities are the focus of so much of what we mean when we talk about social justice. And that is not to ignore the countryside or the suburbs. It's simply to acknowledge that so many of the big social justice issues are focused on areas of contested space, which is what cities are. According to the statistics, at a conservative measure, over half the world's population live in a city at the moment. Some people put that statistic much, much higher. The spectrum goes from just over half up to 95% of the world's global population living in a city. I think it's probably somewhere in the middle of that. The simple point is the majority of people in our world live in cities today. They are, of course, fascinating places. And I speak of one who has become endlessly fascinated by London for the past 7 years. They are cosmopolitan crossroads, holding out the promise of excitement, choice, employment, entertainment, learning, relationship. But the reality is often very different from that. Cities can act as a magnet for crime. The close proximity of different cultures can produce racial tension. The gap between rich and poor can become magnified. The environment exhausted. And as somebody once said very tellingly, one definition of city life is simply millions of people being lonely together. Cities are full of promise, but in my experience and having lived in a number of cities in the United Kingdom, they rarely deliver what they promise. And although Christianity in this country evolved, broadly speaking, within a rural framework, leaving as its legacy, even today, a church which struggles to find a place in city life, nonetheless, Scripture's witness to God's sweep of salvation throughout history is stark in its simplicity. The Bible begins in a garden and ends in a city. The bookends of the Bible are two very different pictures of paradise. One a garden, the other a city. And that picture of paradise shifts from country to city, from Garden of Eden to the New Jerusalem. Heaven, in biblical terms, is urban. And so we seek the city which is to come. Our daily prayer remains, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as in heaven. The pattern of God's heavenly city is to be our guide and inspiration for redeeming the life of our earthly cities and our earthly existence. And this is a high calling. If we are to take the life of the church seriously, it will involve a continuing commitment to engage with the real issues of urban existence, employment, justice, education, healthcare, law enforcement, environment, and the rest from a Christian perspective. It will involve speaking up for, and in my terms, more importantly, giving voice to those who have no voice in the political process. It will involve frontier care for the casualties of the system, yes, but it will also involve challenging decisions which flout core Christian values. It will involve a humble willingness to listen and learn from others, an ability to absorb the complexities of the problems facing large cities around the United Kingdom. And one of the key disciplines for us, if we're to do this well, will be that of contemplation, that ability to see what others miss. Indeed, contemplation is at the heart of what I believe the church might be called to contribute to social justice. The ancient world believed that the word temple, long before it referred to an earthly building, designated a place in the sky, a divine arrangement of the stars, a dwelling place for the gods. And in its youngest and purest form, contemplation was about building on earth a sort of temple which could be a building, but also could be your personality, or a moral structure, or indeed a city, which corresponded with the temple in the sky. Contemplation meant literally bringing together the two temples, the one in the sky with the one on earth. That is to say, all of human life is to be brought into conformity with the harmony of heaven. Once we understand that, we begin to see that contemplation is a very practical, I would say a very political discipline. It sounds all spiritual, but it connects fundamentally with practical, physical, and political realities in life. The writer to the Hebrews put it like this: "Here we have no lasting city. We seek the city which is to come." The essence of our spirituality, of our prayer, is to be a contemplation of the city which is to come, a growing conformity between the city on earth and the heavenly city. And that will mean that prayer and worship gets linked inextricably with political activity. Our activism emerges from contemplation, from prayer, from worship, from drawing together God's vision for the world as it might be with our experience of the world as it is. Social justice is not, therefore, just a bolt-on, a last-ditch attempt to make the Christian faith seem relevant to a world intent on looking in the opposite direction. It is at the heart of what makes us distinctive, which is to be a community of prayer and worship. And lest we forget, liturgy, liturgia, is a Greek composite word meaning originally a public duty, an act of service undertaken by a citizen. The work of the people reminds us, if ever we needed it reminding, that what we do in church is intimately connected to what we do as a church. To go back to one of those 10 classic principles of Roman Catholic social teaching, the theological basis for a commitment to social justice is predicated on that classic argument of a divine bias to the poor, expressed vibrantly in passages such as Mary's Magnificat and Jesus' Nazareth Manifesto. He has put down the mighty from their seat and has exalted the humble and meek. He has filled the hungry with good things. The rich he has sent empty away. Should be another one coming up in a sec. Here we go. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives, recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord. The acceptable year of the Lord is an unmistakable reference to the year of Jubilee, that extraordinary and probably ultimately untested idea from the Old Testament, where debts are released and slavery is redeemed on a messianic scale. This Nazareth Manifesto is the political essence of what Christianity is about. Not something safe to hold within the walls of a church building, but something daring, risky, adventurous, breathtaking, to take out into the world beyond our doors. Working for social justice is not an add-on to Christianity, something for the left-wing radicals to get their teeth into. It is at the heart of everything we are meant to be doing in our life together as a church. You'll no doubt be aware of the famous comment by theologian and pastor Helmut Thielicke, who once said that our checkbooks have more to do with heaven and hell than our hymn books. He might equally have said prayer books, I suppose. Actually, the point is that checkbooks and hymn books and prayer books, they're all part of the same library. Jesus Christ summed up the heart of Christianity with that famous one-liner, love God and love your neighbour. At the heart of Christian social action is something profoundly spiritual. Churches are not just another social agency. They are motivated and energized by living faith. And for years, those of you who have been involved like me in this area of work, for years this has been an embarrassment to our secular partners. They have recognized increasingly over the past 10, 15 years, I think, come to recognize the contribution of the church, but they have been extraordinarily reluctant to connect that contribution to the religious dimension that we offer. But this won't do. Church action, Christian action, is driven by a living faith. Love God and love your neighbour. That is a profoundly Catholic understanding of all this. There is a phrase about working for social justice which is drawn from a book by Michael Taylor, who, when he was Director of Christian Aid some years ago, said this: "The evidence of lasting progress in overcoming poverty and injustice is slight. The teachings of the Christian faith insist that the kingdom, though present and growing within our history, will be fully realized only beyond it. Like love, it is an impossible possibility." I love that phrase, an impossible possibility. That is what drives us and motivates us if we are working for a better, fairer world. There's a lovely story after 9/11 and the attack on the Twin Towers in New York, and the arguments that were raging at the time about how we could defeat terror. And a simple Christian listening to the litany of military experts talking about bombing this and destroying that and taking out the other and hitting at the heart of this, that and the other said, the only way to defeat terror is to out-imagine it. We need to live in the light of God's emerging future, God's impossible possibility, and to transform our communities by out-imagining evil, holding before people an impossible possibility. That, of course, is Walter Brueggemann's great insight for us about the renewal of our theological imagination. It's a point beautifully expressed by this quote from William Cavanagh's boldly titled book, Torture and Eucharist, when he says this: "To participate in the Eucharist is to live inside God's imagination. It is to be caught up into what is really real, the body of Christ." The role of the church is to out-imagine the conventional frameworks within which people imagine the world and its possibilities. And this is, from whatever tradition we come in the church, a profoundly Eucharistic thing to do. If we're to make a commitment to the common good, our challenge is to tell our story and express our faith in a way which arrests the public imagination and inspires people to commit themselves to the Nazarene and his manifesto. Personally, I think we have struggled to find ways of doing this within the Church of England which are coherent. I am somebody who is very committed to community organising. Seems to me this is one way we can express what we are trying to do. For all its faults and failings, and I do not believe that community organising is perfect, don't get me wrong, but I do believe that we need to be committed to finding ways of embedding organising more deeply within the Anglican tradition. I am really pleased you've got Peter Briley coming to talk to you tomorrow, because I think you will get an insight into the ways in which the Anglican Church and organising as a methodology can work together. And I have been working over the past couple of years to try and draw together a group of people to explore what this might look like. And I have great and high hopes that in 10 years' time we might look back and see the ways in which organising and the Anglican tradition have actually worked together to enhance our ability to act justly in society. I happen to think it's a very natural way in which churches can both grow and deepen their commitment to the historic strengths of social justice. Organising is certainly not the only answer, but it is at least an attempt, and we need more of those within the Church of England at the moment. Nick Spencer at Theos has coined the phrase social liturgy as a way of getting beyond the old phrase social gospel, if you're familiar with that one, and helping us think more creatively about the nature of the work the church is doing. Social liturgy. In some ways, that's simply developing the Eucharistic theology that I was trying to talk about earlier on. And then there is Together for the Common Good, another important attempt to resource churches and individual Christians with the intellectual and theological tools that they need to make a difference. And if you haven't checked out Together for the Common Good's websites, please do that. And then in London, St Martin in the Fields is working on a project. It's a great project. It's a rubbish name. It's called Heart Edge. But it's a fantastic project, and it's another way in which an individual church is trying to do something and build a network to help the Church of England think carefully about what it means to engage with issues of social action and social justice. However we do it, our commitment to social justice requires action. It requires new thinking, it requires innovation, and it requires experiment. Not to save the church, but to save the world. Those are the three questions I put up, or I said I'd put up at the end when I began my talk. Could you spend 5 minutes just on your tables discussing? You might want to discuss all of these. Actually, you might need more than that. Maybe 7 or 8 minutes around your tables. So, how does this relate to the life of the deanery that you serve in? The third question is probably better, second, isn't it? What are you already doing that you think embodies and epitomises that? And then how could your deanery give expression to things that you're not doing at the moment? So do you want to spend just 7 or 8 minutes chatting around the tables? You don't have to talk about those questions, but I'd love to know how you think it lands in relation to your deaneries, and or anything else that is you want to question or challenge, or you've been agitated by, or you want to question. Please spend those 7 or 8 minutes just digesting and generating some discussion which we can have around the room in a few minutes' time.